Thanks so much, Ben. And yeah, thank you, My Jewish Learning. This series has been so much fun. Those of you who have been with us all three times, or if you've caught the recordings, we've had some great back and forth. I did get some feedback from some folks saying a few people requested we spend a little bit less time on what's going on the chat. So I'm going to try and follow that as best I can. So if you have something to share on the chat, please still share it. But just like think about it before you share it, just so we can kind of moderate it a little bit, as some people were finding it a little bit too much. But I do look forward to, as always, what folks want to say. So I'm going to share my screen to make it easy. So you have the handout and the link that Ben just shared, but also you can look on with me, and we're going to be carrying on going through handout 2, because we frankly have a long way to go on it. I don't know if we'll even finish this one in this class, but that's okay. We have a lot of great material here. A lot of it actually really is relevant to questions that have come up already in earlier classes too. So about leadership and being a tzaddik, a righteous person, and what was special and unique about Rebbe Nachman. So we have some great stuff to come. Let's start. We did already sources 1 and 2 on this sheet. That stories, according to Rebbe Nachman, stories don't put people to sleep. Stories wake people up. And then we did the story of the tainted grain. That is just brilliant. And actually, that was what took so long last time, I think. We heard so many different interpretations of that story because it can be understood in so many different ways. And now we're doing number 3. At the bottom of page 1, Likutei Moharan, volume 1, teaching 6. And this he wrote himself with his own hand. The whole first volume of Likutei Moharan is his gleanings or takings from the master. And he put his own pen to paper for this. And this is a really important teaching in the corpus. This is just a very small snippet from it, but I pulled out the essential core. And especially important for us right now at this time of year, as we're beginning to look, very soon we're going to enter the month of Elul, which leads us up to Rosh Hashanah, the new year, Yom Kippur and all that. So Elul, one of the major themes of Elul is Teshuvah, which is returning to our best selves or returning to the divine. So he has something very important to tell us about that in teaching we're going to read now. If you want to walk in the ways of Teshuvah, again, returning to our best selves or returning to the divine, you need to be proficient in walking, which requires being proficient in 2 skills, running and returning. So in Hebrew, that's baki b'ratzo, baki b'shov. You need to be proficient in these 2 things, ratzo and shov. Hence the verse, I am my beloved, and my beloved is mine, Song of Songs. And I am my beloved, the first half of the verse, this is entering. And my beloved is mine, this is leaving. And this is the mystical intention for the month of Elul. So that verse from the Song of Songs in Hebrew is Ani ledodi v'dodi li. And if you take the first letter, I'm going to highlight it here on the sheet so you can see. If you take the first letter from each of those words, Ani ledodi v'dodi li, I am my beloved and my beloved is mine, or I am for my beloved and my beloved is for me. Take the first letter of each of those words, you get Elul. Aleph, Lamed, Vav, Lamed. Elul. That's the name of the month where we're focusing on Teshuvah, returning to the divine, returning to our best selves, getting ready for Rosh Hashanah. So what exactly is he telling us that we have to get good at? What is this running in return business? What's going on here? Why is this so profound? Well, he's saying sometimes in life, and by the way, I should say, before I even explain it, he's not making up this phrase, Ratzov V'shov. It actually, as you can see, I put there from Ezekiel 1:14. So that's the origin of this whole concept. And I should say what it looks like there. And then just before I say what it is to him, I should explain how he got there. In Ezekiel has a vision of the divine chariot, and there are chayot, which are either creatures, but actually really usually understood as angels, a certain kind of angel called a chaya. And a chay, like the word chayim, chay means living or alive. So these angels really embody life. They're really like clearly living beings. And these chayot, these angels, these beings are going back and forth on the divine chariot and this vision that the prophet Ezekiel is having. So Ratzov V'shov refers to something going back and forth. And then in Jewish mysticism, in Sefer Yetzirah, our very first work of mysticism that we have a copy of, and then all the way through all of our works of Kabbalah and Hasidism, which build on that, we find that all of our spiritual masters interpret this concept in their own way, often along similar lines, but this is Rebbe Nachman's take. He says in life, when things are going great, when you're having a good day, a good month, a good year, you're building, you're growing, things are going away, in his language, he would say you're getting closer to the divine. Then that's what he calls running. Everything is moving in the direction you want it to. But as we all know, life isn't always like that, right? Life is made up of those days and those years, and then other times too, when stuff is a lot harder. And he says that's when you need the other skill of returning. And what he means by that is sometimes you are just going the wrong way. Sometimes you are just facing the wrong way, moving the wrong way. Things are getting worse and worse. And we have to learn the very difficult life skill of turning things around. And of course, sometimes it's like on a small scale and it's not so hard, and that's good because we get practice. But sometimes in our lives, it's pretty big. And we have to learn how to turn the whole ship around. And it's not so easy. It doesn't turn on a dime. So he says, this is what you need if you want to walk, if you want to progress in life. You got to make the most of the good days. When you're running, you got to know how to build on that. Don't get too carried away. Don't get too overconfident, but do the good job the best you can to make the most of it. As we say in England, make hay while the sun shines, because the sun shines in England like 2 days a year. So you gotta make hay while it's shining. But then with returning, you got to learn what to do to change your whole direction when things are not going the way you want. So that's the teaching, and that's what he says is the key to this month of Elul, getting closer to the divine, closer to our best selves. Let me just come back together and see if anyone put something on the chat about that. Just a couple of private messages, nothing to share right now. I appreciate the messages. Thank you, everyone. Anyone want to share anything or ask anything about that teaching? Oh, I see a hand. Sylvia, I don't know if we can do unmuting. It's not. Oh, right. Someone's okay. So, are you able to ask on the chat? Yeah, brilliant. Okay, great. All right, and now I understand that so Ben, if it's possible, it's something actually I didn't get right. If it's possible to make the chat open so that everyone can see people's comments, then that's good too. Sorry, I got confused before. That's normally how it was. Thank you.
It does.
Thanks so much. Could I explain? Someone asked, could I explain the acrostic in Hebrew? So I'm going to do that. And also, Leslie, do the angels and Jacob's ladder have anything to do with this as well? Oh, great, Leslie. They also go up and down. So yeah, that's a great image. It's not exactly the same words, but it's definitely a very, very close parallel. Let me just explain that acrostic again. Someone asked me to. So I'm going to highlight here in the Hebrew this line. This is a verse from, or half a verse from Song of Songs. Ani ledodi v'dodi li. I am for my beloved, or I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. If you take the first letter from each of those words, it's Aleph, Lamed, Vav, Lamed, then you get the name of the month, Elul. That's it. You got it? Awesome. You're welcome. All right. So let's push on, friends. We have loads of great stuff to see. Number 4. So the verse in Psalms, which actually this psalm is said in the Friday night service, Kabbalat Shabbat. So those of you who have been familiar with that, you might have said this. Psalm 95. Today, if you heed his voice, that's what the verse in Psalm says, and this is what Rebbe Nachman said about it. This is an important rule in the service of God. One should focus only on today. Whether with regard to their livelihood and personal needs, they should not think about one day to the next, as is brought in the holy books. Or with regard to their serving God, they should not consider anything beyond this day and this moment. For when a person wants to enter the service of God, it seems to them a heavy burden. They cannot possibly bear such a heavy load. However, when a person considers that they have only that day to deal with, they will find it no burden at all. In addition, a person should not procrastinate from one day to the next, saying, I'll start tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll pray more attentively and with the right enthusiasm, and likewise for the other devotions. For a person's world consists only of the present day and moment. Tomorrow is a different world entirely. Today, if you heed his voice, specifically today, understand this. So I think this is a great example, and this happens a few times, actually many times, throughout Rabbi Nachman and throughout the other Hasidic masters. They basically say things that we could find very, very similar analogs to in the mindfulness literature of people like Eckhart Tolle and Thich Nhat Hanh, and those of you who are familiar, Sharon Salzberg. Very, very similar advice. If any of you have ever been to meditation class, you probably would have heard someone say, don't try and meditate for the whole time we're meditating, like the whole half hour, whatever it is. Just focus on one breath at a time. Just focus on one moment at a time. And in life, if we're suffering from anxiety and we're worrying a lot, the advice we get often is, try not to worry too much about the future. Take things one day at a time. So he's saying this really applies to every significant area of life, including our spiritual growth. It's very easy to get overwhelmed if I start thinking like, oh my God, like between now and whenever it is that my life is going to end, I have to be perfect. I have to never do anything wrong, never say anything stupid, never do anything bad. Obviously impossible. If I can just take it one day at a time, then maybe I can be present and I can actually do the best I can one day at a time. So that's the advice. We'll carry on. Oh wait, there's something on the chat. Let me take a look. Brilliant. Sharon says this helped her so much in her practice. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Sharon. Wonderful. So wait, how do I close the chat? I got this newfangled Zoom interface. Okay, good. Let's carry on. Number 5, very short teaching, and then we'll do a slightly longer one along similar lines about it. Obstacles. Know that every person is only given obstacles according to their strength, according to what they can bear and overcome. As one, I saw this sticker once on somebody's fridge. If Hashem led you to it, then Hashem will lead you through it. So Hashem doesn't give us any more than we can bear. Now, of course, I want to say really a disclaimer about this, which is, it's very easy to say this, right? But it doesn't mean it's always true for everyone. Of course, we know sometimes, people don't come out on top. So I want to own that, and also say this is one of the areas of the Hasidic worldview that I think is open to critique, question, pushback, from our own experience. I find it very, very helpful that essentially they give this very positive message of you can overcome anything. At the same time, I think we have to acknowledge, like I say, the good guy doesn't always win. We don't always overcome everything. But bear in mind, as we talked about in previous classes, an important, not only important, but central part of the Hasidic worldview is reincarnation, which means they are taking the long view. They're thinking, even if you don't come out on top this time around, even if it seems that the obstacle got the better of you, their opinion is, in the end, you can overcome whatever this force is, even if you have to go around multiple times to do it, in multiple lifetimes. So that's what they're basing this on. I see something on the chat. Could person be replaced with the Jewish people as a whole? Absolutely. Yeah, definitely, Avril. Thank you for that question. Yeah, certainly. And that really applies to how they view the direction of history generally. We are headed in, again, according to the Kabbalists and the Hasidim, and to many voices in our tradition, we're headed towards a perfect messianic era of peace and justice. Everyone's going to be happy and have enough and be at peace. But of course, it doesn't look like that right now, right? It's very far from linear. There are many obstacles between, where we are now and that. So yeah, exactly. We will eventually, according to this worldview, overcome all those things. So now let's do a longer piece about obstacles. And it's actually very beautiful and profound. This is from Likutei Halachot. That was written by Rebbe Nachman. I've mentioned before, is Rebbe Nachman's main student and took over the mantle after Rebbe Nachman died. He didn't become Rebbe because there was no Rebbe after Rebbe Nachman, but he became the one who led the movement and really became a channel for Rebbe Nachman's teachings into the world. Excuse me. And Likutei Halachot, I should say, is he basically goes through the whole of the code of Jewish law, the Shulchan Aruch, and ties teachings from Rabbi Nachman to it. So it's like section by section, and it's beautiful, really beautifully done. Let's see. The essence of desire is made through hindrance. For through hindrances, we increase our desire. So you might think hindrances, obstacles, things that stop us are like, a pain in the tuchus. But he's telling you, actually, this is how we increase our desire. He goes on, all hindrance is only for desire. And in truth, both are necessary, the hindrance and the desire. The hindrance is absolutely necessary because we need to receive gradually and appropriately. If we receive more than is appropriate for us, we can be completely annulled. For too much oil extinguishes the lamp. It's like these very sad stories you hear about people who like win the lottery, right? And sometimes it goes well for them, but sometimes you hear about people who win the lottery, they suddenly have the ability to have anything they want in life, and unfortunately their life goes very, very bad after that. Sometimes even their life ends soon after that, unfortunately, in very sad circumstances. They suddenly get such abundance, they don't know how to deal with it. For we are not able to receive too much light. If we try, then the thing we were trying to fix is damaged. This is like, quote from the Gemara, the Talmud, if one comes to purify himself, they assist him. Through hindrance and desire, a vessel is made that can receive the light gradually and appropriately. So you might think an obstacle is a pain in the tuchus, like I said. But actually, if you can overcome that obstacle, you're making the right vessel, which then can receive more light. I'm sure we've all experienced this in our personal lives, in our work lives, in all kinds of different areas of our lives. The setbacks ultimately help us grow our container so we can receive more. That's what he's saying. So he's reminding us to take a positive view of setbacks ultimately and say, it's very easy to get angry, frustrated, and so on about it. Actually, it's a growth opportunity. That's what he's saying. Let's see there's something on the chat. There has been so much historically that has been unbearable for Jewish people in the here and now. Right, Marty's talking about the last teaching, I think, about how like there were so many things which seem to be more than we can overcome, and taking that long view, that the tradition and the mystics say eventually all those things will be overcome. Thank you for that, Marty. And I'm not seeing any responses on the chat to that one, so I'm going to carry on. When I see stuff on the chat, I'm gonna come back. 7, I think we should skip because it's so long. If we have time at the end, then I'll come back to it, because I really want to make sure we get to teachings later on the sheet, which are really central to the questions people have been asking earlier in the course. Just a couple of things on the chat. Let's see. Who wrote number 6? Someone asked. Oh, sorry, that's from Likutei Halachot. That's written by Rebbe Nachman. I can actually write that in the chat. Rebbe Nachman of Breslov. If you Google that after class, you'll get lots of information about him. There's a whole wiki about him. And Joan says, Khalil Gibran said something similar about the more sadness, the more joy we can contain. Yeah, beautiful, Joan. I appreciate that on a lot of levels. I think that, again, like modern mindfulness literature and practice really stresses this. Emotions are one spectrum, and we cannot turn down our ability to feel some without turning down our ability to feel all, and same for turning up. So the more we sensitize ourselves to any of them, the more we can feel of all of them. And so, yeah, more pain and more sadness also means more joy and more love. Exactly. Brilliant. Let's carry on. So as I said, 7 we'll come back to if we have time. I'm not sure if we will, because it's so long, but we'll see. I see something else in the chat. David, is it useful to think of the obstacles that help us grow as the action of gevura, of loving, rigorous restraint, as opposed to kind chesed? Yeah, David, that's brilliant, actually. For those of you, not everyone, it's not a class in Kabbalah, so maybe not everyone is familiar with. David is talking about the sefirot, or the qualities of the Kabbalistic tree of life. And gevura, sometimes understood as strength, severity, restraint. Gevura helps make the vessel, exactly like they were saying. Chesed is more like the water which flows into the vessel. And if you have a healthy interaction between them, the expansive flow of the water and the containing force of the vessel, then you get a very good situation. You get a container full of what you want. Yeah, very good there. Beautiful. So let's look at number 8. This is what he said. How would it be possible that they not oppose me? For I am walking on a new path, one which no person has walked before from the time of the receiving of the Torah. Even though it is a very old path, it is also completely new. So this is very typical of Rebbe Nachman, and I think in some ways of Hasidic masters generally, and of many of our mystics generally. They all do add things and innovate, and that's why it's exciting and fun, and to learn what they're saying, and to study the changes they make. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so fun if there was just one set of teachings and it never evolved. It evolved, but at the same time, they have to claim authenticity and they have to claim that they're part of the tradition. So there's this kind of paradox there. This is brand new. Of course, people are pushing back on me because he got a lot of resistance, a lot of pushback, even persecution, even from other Hasidim, even other Hasidic Jews gave him a lot of pushback, even during his own life. And then his followers also got a lot after, and we'll talk about that soon. But even though he's saying, I'm doing so much that's new, really, this is the real McCoy. This is the authentic tradition, just as it should be. So that's the paradoxical claim he's making. And we'll see how that played out in a sec. Now, Arthur Green in Tormented Master has this to say about the conflict and controversy. He says, the conflicts that surrounded Nachman gave him no rest. Nachman's religious life demands of him that he be in a state of constant ascent and growth. This growth is spurred by controversy and would be stunted by peace. So remember what we just saw, that obstacles and setbacks are actually opportunities for growth, to grow your vessel and receive more light. So every time Rabbi Nachman and his followers were persecuted, were opposed, were pushed out of one town or excommunicated from here and there, it happened many times to them, he tried to use it as an opportunity for growth. And actually, Arthur Green is saying in his biography of Rebbe Nachman that Rebbe Nachman needed that. He thirsted for that. He needed that fuel for his growth. Listen to this teaching number 10 about this situation. No, when a person encounters opposition, they should not take a stand against their enemy, saying, whatever they do to me, I will repay in kind. For this causes their enemy to achieve their goal. It enables their enemy to see happen to them, God forbid, what they wanted to see happen to them. On the contrary, it is right that they judge them favorably and do for them every good. This is the aspect of let my soul be like earth to everyone, Brachot 17a, the Talmud. We say something similar in some versions of the Amidah, the standing prayer, right at the end of it. So it's an optional addition. Like the earth, everyone treads on it, yet it provides them with every good. Food, drink, gold, silver, precious stones, it all comes from the earth. So earth is the lowest thing. It's underneath our feet, yet it gives everything good. Similarly, even though they oppose them, the opponents who are opposing us, and seek their harm, even if, God forbid, there are people really trying to hurt us, they should nevertheless do for them every good, like the earth, as explained above. So imagine, people are trying to hurt us. We should be like the earth for them. We should give them, we should feed them, we should sustain them, we should do good for them. This is analogous to the case of a person who digs under their neighbor's house. If their neighbor positions themselves so that they likewise start digging in their direction, then the person who began the digging will certainly reach their goal with ease. However, if one person digs and their neighbor positions himself inside, pouring earth and creating a mound in their way, then they overturn the other's plan. The enemy is then unable to accomplish their goal. So somebody's digging at you. If you start digging at them, then you're going to make it easier for them. But instead, put heap more and more and more earth on top, and you'll actually make it harder for them. The kinder you are for them, the harder you make it for them to attack you. Similarly, one should not take a stand against one's enemies, working against them, for this is the aspect of digging just like the enemy, making it easier for them to reach their goal. However, by means of the aspect of earth, this quality that earth has, the aspect of let my soul be like earth, this humility, they overturn their enemy's plan, as explained above. Then, verse from Proverbs, he who digs a pit will fall into it. It's interesting, for all this talk about non-violence and don't fight back, he's not saying that the person who's attacking us, he's not actually saying that he wants something good to happen to them in the end. He actually says, he says, do good for them, do kindness for them, don't attack them. And in the end, they will fall in the pit. There's this like paradox there again, right? That he actually does want to see the enemy fall in the pit, but the way to get there is through spiritual growth and kindness. Carries on. They fall, the enemy, the one who's trying to attack you, they fall and remain in the pit that they dug for their neighbor as a result of the earth that was poured on it. For their neighbor stands there pouring earth in their way by means of the aspect of let my soul be like earth as explained above. This is when their opponents are wicked people. However, when those who oppose them are tzaddikim, then certainly their intention is only for good, as they elevate and raise them up by this and mitigate the judgments against them. It is like a person digging under their neighbor to secretly throw them a nice present. We find something similar in connection with charity. There were a number of Talmudic sages who would hand out charity secretly so that the one receiving it would not know. That's mentioned in the Talmud in Ketubot. The same is true of the opposition of tzaddikim, the righteous people which is actually they're giving them good secretly and in concealment, as mentioned above. So he says everything I just said about heaping earth on them, doing good for them so that they'll fall in a pit, that applies to when you're being attacked by someone wicked. But if somebody who is righteous, and of course, how do we know? But if someone is righteous and they seem to be attacking you, resisting you, being an obstacle to you, then his advice is actually to realize that if they're really a righteous person, then secretly they're doing good for you in some way. And it's like this case in the Talmud where these sages, these righteous people would secretly do good for people. They would secretly give charity. So that's his claim. Let's look at the chat. I think someone responded to it. Anna says, therefore, the divine is accepting of our obstacles, is all accepting of our obstacles. The opportunity for growth comes with obstacles. Exactly. Beautiful. So that's very much the key to his idea was obstacles. And then this is the application of it. And now actually, well, that's the application of it. But some of you might be thinking, yeah, right. Like, did he really do that? Listen to this story. This is from number 11. It's not from him, but from his successor, Rebbe Nachman. Listen to this. Rebbe Nachman, who again took over after Rabbi Nachman died in 1810. He led the movement, and they had a very, very hard time. He led the Breslov Hasidim, the followers, through a particularly difficult period known as the Years of Oppression, 1834 to 38, in which the sovereign Rebbe, another Hasidic Rebbe, Rav Moshe Tzvi of Savran, used his considerable influence to persecute the Breslovers by ethically dubious and often violent means. You guys might not believe this, but even this is the early 19th century. Hasidim were throwing rocks at each other. They were excommunicating each other. They were being violent. They were informing to the non-Jewish authorities, trying to get each other arrested and thrown in jail. And not only trying to, they did it. So all kinds of very, very serious, dangerous things were happening. And this is what happened. However, Rebbe Nachman told his family and followers not to respond in kind to these provocations. He said, this is what Rebbe Nachman said, they are our brothers. Eventually, they will be rectified. We ourselves will have to seek remedies for them. So this connects to an idea in the Zohar that when we make teshuvah, when we return to our best selves, return to the divine, we fix something in the universe. We fix something that we can't see, we can't feel, but it has a ripple effect that goes far, far beyond just ourselves. It fixes, and here the claim is, it fixes even the people who are attacking us, even the people who actually are causing the problem. When we do the spiritual work on ourselves, we can fix them, even them. See what's on the chat. Regarding your statement of kindly pushing back, I wonder if the Yishuv had been unbelievably kind to the British, if there would have been an independent state of Israel at this time. I realize it's an extreme example, but there has to be kindness with a nudge. Yeah, I appreciate that comment. I agree. I think, I don't know if there would be a state of Israel if the Jews living in pre-state Israel would have, very politely asked the British to leave without taking a more direct approach. So I'm not necessarily saying that this approach is always the right one, but it's just interesting to know that the followers of Rebbe Nachman really walked the walk with this. They really kept to it, even under very difficult circumstances. And there's even been some work showing that the Breslov Hasidim were a very, very small group until recently. But there were Breslov Hasidim who were in Poland and other places affected by the Holocaust. And they tried to, the best they could, to adhere to this code of behavior, even under those very, very extreme circumstances. Again, I'm not really saying, is it right, is it wrong? Is that, I'm just saying, this is what they believed and this is what they did. I do think, considering, those are very, the Shoah, the Holocaust, and then the struggle against the British in pre-state Israel, these are very, very extreme examples. Most of the time, when most of us have interpersonal conflict in life, is not in the context of such extreme violence most of the time, right? So most of the time, I think the message can be very applicable and helpful. Right. So Joe says, so are they really fighting back on a spiritual level? So yeah, that's one way of looking at it, Joe. By expanding my container, by growing spiritually, he says in that teaching about the earth, that eventually, and I'll just go back to it here and highlight it, he says, then the person who is digging the pit is actually going to fall into it. So it's not that we wish everything good, and for that person, it's not that we actually want to actually help them. It's that by doing the growth we need to do, if somebody really is wicked and really is attacking us for no reason, then they'll fall in their own pit. And if they're not, if they're a righteous person, then that's fine too, because they're secretly helping us. Yeah, thank you for that, Joe. Let's read a bit more from Arthur Green. This is about Rabbi Nachman's unique claim to be a tzaddik, a righteous person, that we've keeps coming up, and people have asked about it in earlier classes, so I wanted to do this with you. Rabbi Nachman asserted that he was tzaddik hador, literally the righteous person of the generation, or as Arthur Green put here, the leader, the spiritual leader, he means, of the entire generation. It's an idea that comes up in the Talmud in Yoma. This claim means his is the all-inclusive soul of his generation, the soul that Moses bore in the past and which Messiah is to bear in the future, the Messiah. All other souls are but specifications or subdivisions of that general soul. So this idea is one that comes up in earlier texts in Kabbalah, that essentially the soul of Moses and the soul of the Messiah comes back in every generation, because remember, reincarnation, right? So in every generation, there's somebody whose soul contains every other soul that's alive at that time. And that is the spiritual leader of their generation. Carrying on, Nachman's vision of the paradoxical tzaddik is a dialectical resolution of Nachman's own alternating states of elation and depression, now aggravated by the accusations against him. So just say that in slightly easier English. So Rabbi Nachman, like we talked about in the first class especially, is up and down all the time. Arthur Green says maybe he might be bipolar, manic depressive. I don't know. But there's a lot of things about his behavior that certainly lend themselves to looking through that lens. He's up and down all the time in his inner life. And then that's further aggravated by all this pushback and accusation and resistance against him. And Arthur Green now is going to explain how that helped him formulate his own version of the tzaddik, a totally new vision of the tzaddik that no one else had ever come up with before. Tzaddik means righteous person, but it means something different to him. Until Nachman says, and in all other Hasidic communities contemporaneous with his, at the same time as his, the tzaddik was seen as a clearly superior figure who chose to bind his lot with that of others by a willful act of generosity. In direct contrast to this earlier model, Nachman functions so well as a tzaddik, not because he's always remained above the reaches of sin, but rather precisely because he himself has undergone all the conflicts and torments that even the most beleaguered of his followers could ever imagine, and has emerged triumphant. So again, I'll just say that again in plain English. All the other Hasidic Rebbes, their claim to be a tzaddik, a righteous person, is based on them saying that they essentially have a kind of purity or innocence, that they have remained far from sin. And Rebbe Nachman doesn't say that. Rebbe Nachman says, I have been to the lowest places. I have been to the darkest places, and I've pulled myself up, and now I can do the same for you. That's his claim. Very, very radically different. See what's on the chat. Oh, beautiful. Walt Whitman, says Diane. Have you not learned great lessons from those who braced themselves against you and disputed the passage with you? You have to look up the rest of that. Thank you for that, Diane. Appreciate that. So let's carry on, and we'll see more on this theme of Rebbe Nachman's unique leadership as a tzaddik. 13. He, Rebbe Nachman, was very impatient with those who thought that the main reason for the tzaddik's high spiritual level and great understanding was only because he has a very, very great soul. He said this was not the case, but that everything essentially depends on good deeds, struggle, and ritual acts. He said explicitly that everyone in the world could merit even the highest level, for everything depends only on human choice. So I want to point out again the paradox, because we just saw in Art Green in that previous section that Rabbi Nachman claimed that he was embodying the great soul that only comes down once in a generation, which is the soul of Moses and the soul of Messiah. At the same time, he says, anybody can do it. It's not about being given a great soul. It's about the effort that you make. So you can draw your own conclusions about, the balance between those things or the resolution between those things. He said both of them. Both of them are actually really important to understanding who he was and the advice he was giving his followers. Let's see. Okay, no problem. So let's look at one more quote from Arthur Green. The relationship he had with his disciples, unique in both quality and intensity, did not allow him in any way to be replaced. Remember I said that before, that when he died, Rebbe Nosson took over leading the movement, but he never became the Rebbe. Rebbe Nosson, unlike in every other dynasty, every other Hasidic dynasty, the successor becomes the new Rebbe. Rebbe Nosson never became the new Rebbe. And in fact, other groups of Hasidim and other Jews would tease the Breslovers. I think I mentioned this in the first class. They would say, you are the dead Hasidim because your Rebbe is dead, whereas we will have a living Rebbe. And the Breslovers would respond and they would say, better to have a dead Rebbe who's alive than a living Rebbe who's dead. So that was how they viewed it. Their Rebbe might be dead, but really he was very alive. And carrying on with the quote from Arthur Green, only by seeking faith within doubt and by the paradoxical assertion that in God's absence is he to be known, may the doubter be transformed once again into a seeker after him. So maybe I'll just say that again, there was a lot there. Only by seeking faith within doubt and by the paradoxical assertion that in God's absence is he to be known, may the doubter be transformed once again into a seeker after him. So let me just say a word about that, just that sentence on its own. One of Rabbi Nachman's teachings is sometimes we don't feel God. Sometimes you might feel like you're far from God or God is absent. You might feel that you don't believe in God, you don't connect to God. That can happen to everybody. It happens to, certainly in our world today, I'm sure it happens to everybody. And Rabbi Nachman, one of his teachings was, in the absence itself is part of our relationship with God and actually part of God's presence. That feeling you have of being bereft of God, of being orphaned, if you had a connection to God before and then you didn't anymore, and then feeling like, oh, like God has left me. He says even that feeling is actually just God pulling back to give you space to grow. Actually, it's part of the relationship with God. Right, carrying on. His greatest success in expanding the horizons of faith lay in his struggle with his own doubts. In this he became, in spite of all his attachments to the world of the past, a tzaddik, a righteous person, for the modern man. In his willingness to live at the edge of the void, a void that was to become apparent to so many in the generations following his death, Nachman did indeed earn his title of Tzaddik Hador, the righteous one of generations, of times to come. The tzaddik who could continue to show how to struggle for faith in times when the absence of God would seem to be most complete. So what's Arthur Green talking about? He's saying he was really a prophet, Rebbe Nachman, because he set himself up to be a leader for people in modernity, in a modern age. When Rabbi Nachman lived, basically everybody in Europe, everybody in the world that he lived in, still very much believed in God. In many cases, to be a heretic or an atheist would still get you put in prison in many countries in Europe. But only 100 years later, you have biblical criticism, you have psychoanalysis, you have Nietzsche saying God is dead. You have a whole world basically turning on religion and turning on the old man in the sky, the conventional God that had previously been held sacred, and throwing it in the garbage can. And Rebbe Nachman was somehow 100 years ahead of his time, set himself up to be a leader that people living in that world could relate to, in the modern world and even in the postmodern world, when God seems, as Art Green says, when the absence of God would seem to be most complete, right? When God seems completely not here at all, Rabbi Nachman's teachings can still help us connect to God if we want to, because of this, as it says, the paradoxical assertion that in God's absence, he is to be known. So this wasn't only him. There were other Hasidic rabbis who said similar things. As who was it? I believe it may have been the Kopska Rebbe who said, I was looking for God and looking for God and looking for God and couldn't find God and couldn't find God and couldn't find God. And eventually I realized in the not finding was the finding. That feeling I have of despair and emptiness and loneliness that I can't find God, actually that's where I actually am meeting God. That's totally different to what I thought. I was looking for joy and elevation and inspiration, but that's not always how it goes. We have one more teaching scene now, and then I'm very happy to see there are a few things on the chat, and we'll come back and see what they are. This next one, the last one on the sheet, and then we can go back to the early ones too, is one of the very last teachings he gave, and is very, very often quoted as a kind of motto or slogan from him. So he gave this just a few weeks before he died. And even someone who, God forbid, is on the very lowest level of all, in the very pits of hell, God help us, even so they should not give up on themselves, but rather they should fulfill the verse, cry out from the belly of hell, just like Jonah, the prophet did, Jonah from the belly of the well. And the most important thing is to strengthen themselves in every way they can, for there is no such thing as someone who is a lost cause in the entire universe ever. And the Hebrew for that is Ein Shum Yesh Ba'olam Klal. And that's a famous saying that's been turned into many songs by his followers. Ein Shum Yesh Ba'olam Klal. There is no such, another way that line can be translated is, there is no such thing as despair in the world at all. So you might think you're despairing. Everybody goes through despair at some point. But Rabbi Nachman wants to say, don't let your despair be total. Don't give in to despair. Keep alive that other part of you that is going to fight against it and bring yourself out of it. And, he didn't know, he couldn't have known, but, depression, of course, is so prevalent in our world today, right? In numbers that we couldn't have imagined even 50 years ago, let alone when he was living. So a lot of people have been able to find a lot of strength and solace from this teaching. Ein shum yesh ba'olam klal. However much I'm struggling and suffering from depression, however real it is, and however much I might also need to take care of it with medication and all the other ways we have to take care of it, also, don't let myself completely believe it. Don't let myself completely fall into it. Ein shum yesh ba'olam klal. It's not completely, doesn't have to completely define me. Let's come back to the chat and see what folks are sharing there. Where do we get to? Okay, Leslie. Hero being born versus a hero made by his circumstances and choices. Right. So Leslie, it's interesting, isn't it, that he claims both in different ways, right? It's just an interesting thing to try and get our heads around with him. Diane, who decides who is a tzaddik? I thought other people or succeeding generations made that judgment. Does a leader need to be deemed a tzaddik? Yeah, great question, Diane. It's different in every case. Very often it does happen by other people after someone died or during their lifetime. He was very unusual, actually, in saying, not only am I a tzaddik, but I'm the tzaddik. Like completely unique, actually, in that happening. So that was one of the many ways he was so unusual and so unique. Anna, so balanced. The greatest was also the lowest. Humbleness comes from low times, and then we get rewarded. we learn and reach high. Beautiful, Anna. Yeah, very much so. Avril says, the Lubavitchers have not named a successor to their last Rebbe Nachman of Breslov. That's correct, Avril. That's an interesting analog, because in both cases, there was some hope that the leader, by some people, I'm not saying by everyone involved, but there was some hope by some involved that the leader would turn out to be the Messiah. And therefore, that would be the end of history, and there wouldn't need to be a successor. So there are some interesting parallels there. There are also a lot of differences too, but that's just one thing. Joan says, so we can return. Joan, forgive me, I'm just not sure what you were commenting on from earlier, but you're welcome to make another comment and say. Anna says, these teachings give hope even when I'm hopeless or feel godless. The divine encompasses even the void. Yeah, Anna, beautifully put. Actually, that's exactly the language that Rabbi Nachman uses. He goes back to the idea from the earlier Kabbalist, Rabbi Isaac Luria, the Arizal, that to create the world, the divine has to pull back and create a void. The idea is that if the divine, the Kabbalists call the divine Ein Sof, there is no limit, the limitless one. So if the divine is infinite, limitless, is everything, then there's no room for the divine to have a relationship with us unless the divine pulls back and makes space for us. So when the divine pulls back, what you get is a void. The void really is just an opportunity for a relationship. So really, the divine is present even in the void, even though it seems otherwise. That's the theory. Sharon says, my rabbi explained this to the congregation. I truly understand this. Beautiful, Sharon. Thank you. Rona says, I believe God is purely positive. Please explain why 2/3 of the commandments are negative and only 1/3 are positive. Well, that's a good question. Rona, I mean, I certainly didn't write the Torah, so I can't really speak for it in that way. But, I think something that came up earlier in this class comes to mind, which is that idea about you need boundaries to make the vessel. And I think a lot of the negative commandments are trying to do that. They're trying to create a path, a specific path to receive something, but to receive that thing, we need the right vessel to do it. And I think a lot of the negative commandments are around that. I can't speak for all of them. Like I say, not my handiwork, but that's on one leg how I would explain a lot of them. Joe says, when he says he is on the edge of the void, is he saying he's suffering with us? Yeah. Thank you, Joe, for that question. So this is something that really only Rabbi Nachman said. He said that essentially he will help redeem us from sin. We saw this, something about this in the first class, that essentially he will help save us and redeem us from suffering and from sin. And so he's like going through what we're going through with us. Nancy, you're so welcome. And Joan says, like with Adam and Eve, we're lost so that we can return. Beautiful. So that's what you meant. Right, exactly. So we need the opportunity to get lost, to be exiled, so we can go back. Very much so. So God creates a void, but really it's just an opportunity for relationship, for connection. Very much so. Beautiful. Thanks everyone for those lovely comments. Very wonderful. And it turns out we do have time to go back and do number 7, which is even better, because actually the reason it's on the sheet is because it's very wonderful. I love it. So let's do that. I'll just see one more thing on the chat. iPad 4 says, what would you say was Rebbe Nachman's most important, crucial message to every Jew? So I think that last one that we saw, Ein Shum Yerush Be'olam Klal, there was no despair, never completely give up, is very often quoted as his ultimate message. There's also similar to that. Oh, Miriam, hi Miriam, thank you. Also similar to that is the whole world is a very narrow bridge, and the most important thing is don't make ourselves afraid. Don't give in to fear again. So very similar. I think but there's another one which is different focus but complementary, which is, he said, it's a great mitzvah, it's a great merit to be joyful always. Mitzvah gedola liot b'simcha tamid. It's a great mitzvah to be happy always. So that also, is like the other side of the coin to all of these teachings, right? You're welcome. Rona says, is Judaism a fixed religion or is it dynamic? It's dynamic, definitely. Living Jewish people are as wise and wonderful and dead as unholy as dead living Jews. Agreed. It seems Judaism should continue to grow and change. Agreed. Rona, I agree with everything you said. I'm trying my best to help keeping it evolving and growing. I hope you don't think I'm doing otherwise, but yeah, I'm with you on that. Very much agreed. So let's see one more teaching, friends. We have time. Sichot Haran. Sichot literally means sayings, things that he said. Again, written down by Rebbe Nachman. He says, the world is full of strife and division between the peoples of the world and within every city and within each household and between neighbors and between each person and their spouse and their children and between their children and their servants. No one takes time to hear, the ultimate point, that people die every day. The day that has passed will never return, and they come closer to death every day. So everybody's fighting on every level. They don't just think about the fact that life is such a finite gift. He says, know that everything is one. The private strife within a family and the other examples mentioned above are also the very same strife that exists between rulers and peoples. But each person in a household is the counterpart of a certain people, and they provoke one another just as there is war between the peoples. So you might think what's going on inside you or inside your home is separate and independent. Actually, he's saying everything is microcosms of everything else. Everything reflects everything else. The inner reflects the outer. It's an important principle of Kabbalah in general. Also, it is possible to recognize the traits which each person shares with a particular people, for the character traits of the peoples are known. For example, a certain one is angry and bloodthirsty and so on. And similarly, we find these character traits among the individual members of the household. And even if someone does not want to fight, but rather to dwell in quiet and tranquility, nonetheless, they are also forced into conflict and struggle, just as with the wars between rulers and people. A certain people might want to dwell in tranquility without any conflict at all. On the contrary, it is willing to acquiesce to other peoples many times, but nonetheless, it is also forced into war against its will by warring peoples competing for its allegiance. And so too we find in the private conflicts within a household, as mentioned above. For each person is themselves a miniature universe. Adam, Olam Katan. That's from the ancient Midrash. The ancient rabbis already say that, and he's offering his interpretation of it. A person is a miniature universe. Adam, Olam Katan. And the entire universe and everything in it is found within them. So all the more, so does a household contain all the warring peoples in it. Therefore, a person dwelling alone in the forest could potentially go insane. This happens because all the peoples are included in them, and they provoke one another, forcing the person to continually emulate a different people, depending on which people is dominating the others. For all the peoples are all included in the individual, therefore a person can go completely insane because of the overturning of their character traits each time a different people comes to dominate. But when one lives with people, the conflict can spread out among all those living with this person or their neighbors. The strife in the house of a righteous person, tzaddik, is also related to the wars between peoples. And also the wars between the tribes of Israel, which are fighting one another, Ephraim and Judah and so on. And when the Messiah comes, let it be speedily in our days, then every variety of strife and division will be annulled, and there will be great peace and wholeness in the world, as it is written, they will neither hurt nor destroy, for the knowledge of God will fill the world like the water that covers the sea. So why do I love this teaching? Why is it important? He's saying, it's so easy to read the news and say, tusk, tusk, it's so terrible, the world is so full of problems, conflict, war, environmental, ecological problems, poverty, hunger, so on. It's so easy to read that and then kind of go about our lives the same as we always do. And what I'm getting from this teaching very strongly is what is going on inside us and what is going on around us are a reflection of each other. And of course, I am not in a position to directly, radically alter some big geopolitical situation or even to directly make a huge contribution to stop global warming or whatever it is. But you know what I can do? I can work on having less conflict within myself and within those I immediately share my life with. That I actually can do. It might be very hard, but a person can do that. And if we do that, we will then impact the world around us. That's the claim. Let's see. I see a few things on the chat. So let's see. You're so welcome. A few people saying thank you. You're very welcome. You're very, very welcome. Welcome. Okay. Well, all those people who said thank you, you're all very welcome. and everyone else, you're welcome too. This series has come to an end, and all I can say is I really, really enjoyed learning with you and from you, and I hope we'll get to do that more together with my Jewish learning. And also, I'm going to put in the chat the website that I teach on and run my Applied Jewish Spirituality. It's I'm constantly keep teaching courses through it, and several other teachers teach through it too. So if you want to keep in touch and like find out about those courses, please do. And I hope I'll see you all again. And thank you, Ben. Thanks to everyone.